Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning Five here on Wednesday, September 4th, 2019. I am Dave Biddle. Very happy to be joined by the People's Champ, Matt Baxendell. Back, so much to get into. I want to start with the running backs. Just one game, but we've been talking so much about the running backs during the off season. Now we saw them in action. How do you think things are going to shake out behind J.K. Dobbins? What were your impressions of J.K. Dobbins as the starter? Just your overall thoughts on the running backs.
Well, I think Ryan Day's press conference yesterday was very illuminating about the tailbacks. It seemed to me like he was making a couple comments about how he wasn't happy with the way J.K. Dobbins played. And now Dobbins had a pretty decent game. He ran for 90-something yards and a touchdown. But he made a comment about how the offensive line played better than he realized walking off the field. He said that J.K., his fumble was, quote, unacceptable. There was like some commentary that made me feel like he thought Dobbins might have missed some holes that were well blocked by that O-line when the run game was having some of their struggles. And that was interesting to me because obviously Dobbins is the most experienced guy in the backfield, and I think a lot of us expected him to be the sort of bell cow guy in terms of carries this year, even though he's not the most physically intimidating guy. And when you think about it, that was what he did against FAU. I mean, obviously that one stiff arm where he threw the kid down like a third grader was pretty ridiculous, but Dobbins was trying to run physical in this game. It was like he wanted to hit somebody of the other team, and you could really see that pent-up aggression coming out. The thing is, it's not really Dobbins' game. His game's more of a slashing game, where he gets the ball in space, where he makes a move and he goes, right? And I think it's going to be interesting because I thought Master Teague came in, ripped off 6 yards of carry. Dobbins had yet another game where he was around 4 yards of carry. DeMario McCall showed he's a big play kind of guy, though I don't think McCall's the guy who's going to use those hard yards. And if Master Teague's health all of a sudden is more in the equation as being able to get the ball 5-10 times a game, they may start seeing him get the ball more because at a certain point you're going to have to start trying to find the tailback who's going to get you that 5-6 yards of carry versus the 4 yards of carry. And that's kind of in Dobbins' MO as an OSU player, is he's not going to be the guy who consistently rips off these 5, 6, 7 yard runs. He's the guy who goes 1 yard, 2 yards, 1 yard, 2 yards, 20 yards, right? And that's not really good for sustaining an offense. So I think the running back situation is certainly in flux. And you could see the percentage of carries shifting pretty dramatically as we get to the month of September.
Tyreke Smith and Tyler Friday, the sophomore defensive ends, missed the game with undisclosed injuries. Tyler Friday had some type of injury in practice late in camp. Tyreke Smith had off-season surgery of some sort. They were warming up. They were in full uniform. They looked like, to me, just from watching them in warm-ups, they could have played if it was a bigger game. Larry Johnson was asked about it yesterday. He said they're both, quote, close to being ready. What do you make of that, and especially how much do you think they need Tyreke Smith? I mean, nothing against Tyler Friday. He's going to be a good player too, but Tyreke Smith's the one guy backs when you talk to some of his teammates and the coaches, they're like, this guy could be a star.
Well, and how long can you go with your number 2, 3, and 4 defensive ends not on the field? And I know there's a lot of depth on the D-line, and Deshaun Cornell played really well when he got the chance yesterday. We're all excited about JBV, and we're excited about Zach Harrison, but the truth is eventually you start getting some of your top-end guys back in. Tyreke's a guy who I think everybody is expecting a big year from once he gets on the field. He looked really good last year, and it was the first time we got to see him. And he's a guy a lot of people, I think, were of the opinion could pass Jonathan Cooper even if Cooper hadn't been hurt. So he's a big-time guy. And this weekend we have a reasonably big game coming up. So it'd be nice to have him on the field. And same for Tyler Friday. He's a guy who certainly moved his way up the depth chart in camp. He's a guy who we've all been expecting to be a very big contributor this year. So, you could go without some of your top-end guys for the FAU game and the Miami of Ohio game. You prefer to have them for Cincinnati. You prefer to have them for Nebraska. And I think that's all last week was just a precautionary measure, give them another week, sort of fully recover and get themselves right for the year, because You come into the season and you have a nagging injury, it's going to stick with you the whole year. You don't get more healthy over the course of the season, right? It's football. So I think last week's was purely precautionary, but you're going to need to get these guys on the field against a better team in Cincinnati this weekend. And I think that's something that, as OSU fans, we've seen Chase Young dominate when there really wasn't anybody of note to the other team on the other side. You can get some people on the other side who are going to have the opportunity to go one-on-one virtually every play because you have the top defensive end in the country opposite you. You're going to see these guys have a pretty good performance. So I'm looking forward to seeing Tyreke get on the field. I'm looking forward to seeing Friday get on the field. But, in the end, you can't go forever without some of your top-end guys. And I think that's something OSU recognizes, and I think you'll probably see both of them on the field against UC this weekend.
Justin Fields put up really good stats in his debut as the Buckeye quarterback, but looking beyond the stats, what do you think he did really well, and what do you think he still needs to work on the most?
Well, I think overall he was ahead of where I thought he would be for the first game of the year in terms of sort of command of the offense, in terms of accuracy on a lot of his passes. I mean, I thought he had a great day, and I think we're going to be nitpicking at this point because he had a game where he completed 75% of his passes. He threw 4 touchdowns and scored 1 on the ground. I was surprised. Like, it felt to me in that game like he had thrown for 300 and ran for 100-something yards. So I was a little surprised to see that he didn't pass for more than 230-something yards, and he only ran for 60-something yards. That was a surprise. But you could tell, on the other hand, this was a kid who's making his first start in college. And when the offense sort of went through its limbo for that quarter and a half where things weren't particularly good, Fields was a little more seasoned and more comfortable in the team as being the vocal leader of the group. And maybe that mental shakedown doesn't sort of happen. If you have a quarterback who is sort of driving the bus instead of, shifting the gears and putting it on cruise, then I think you're going to see the offense wouldn't have had that second quarter of mediocrity that they had. But it's his first start, and I think that's something he's going to learn is that, he's the quarterback. He's going to be the leader. And I think he's gaining the moral authority to lead more vocally with a group of guys that he was only been teammates with now for 8-9 months. And the truth is, if you go out and you play, then you can look at other people and expect more of them. When you're the new guy, you got to go out and establish your bona fides, and that's what he did in this game. So, there's a long way to go. I certainly am excited to see him against a much better team. Let's face it, that first touchdown he threw to Jeremy Ruckert, everybody on Bucknuts listening to this podcast could have thrown that same pass. I mean, there's nobody within 10 yards of Ruckert on either side of him, and he's in the middle of the field. So, it'll be nice to see him perform well against a higher level competition. But if he goes out this weekend and has the same kind of numbers that he did against Florida Atlantic against UC, then that's a really good sign for how much more he's going to improve over the course of the year. Again, this is his second start, and he looked really good the first game. So I think the leadership aspects for him are going to come with time. The physical abilities are certainly there.
Well, if he can put up big stats in this game and not turn the ball over again, I mean, that bodes really well for him. That's going to be it's going to be a tough test. We'll get to the UC game in a moment. I do want to get your thoughts on, again, it's such a small sample size. It's one game. But we're not talking about one baseball game out of 162. We're talking about one football game out of hopefully 15, probably at least, obviously at least 13, maybe, 14. Garrett Wilson getting shut out in the opener, especially considering how much they were moving the ball in the first quarter, and he was out there a lot. I was surprised he got shut out. He didn't do anything wrong, but I guess I was just expecting them to make more of an effort to get him the ball. I'd never expected him to be like one of the top 2 or 3 receivers. I thought clearly it was going to be KJ Hill and then Chris Olave in some type of order were going to be the top 2 guys, and then you still had Mack and Victor and all those guys. So I was not expecting him to be, one of the leaders or anything. But again, just one game, overreaction central here. But I was surprised that Garrett Wilson didn't get any touches.
Yeah, and I think that's more just a bad luck of the draw. I mean, Fields was spreading the ball around to a fair number of receivers. You could see him trying to go through his progressions, and Garrett Wilson not getting a catch in the first game isn't necessarily an indicator that he's not going to be a good player for OSU this year. I think totally the opposite, that he's going to be a very good player this year. But maybe it's the way the game played out, that he wasn't the one who happened to be open, or there was plays where he was open and Fields got flushed from the pocket. It happened. And if he doesn't have a touch against UC, I'll start to wonder what's going on there. But in the end, this is a kid who's very talented, and the other thing of that equation is we always talk about, look at all these different receiving options OSU had. Well, during the offseason, we really didn't talk a lot about Jeremy Ruckert. You had, 4 catches, 2 touchdowns or something like that in the first game? So if he's yet another option in place, that's fewer touches to go around for the receivers. I think Garrett Wilson's going to be perfectly fine this year. It's just kind of maybe a little oddity of a game that in itself was kind of odd that he didn't get a touch.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Jeremy Ruckert. That was awesome to see him have his coming out party. As we're all quick, just like I did with Garrett Wilson. Like when a guy comes in with a lot of hype, we're like, what's going on with Jeremy Ruckert last year? Only had 1 reception the entire season, and then with his debut, 4 catches, and he gets 2 touchdowns against Florida Atlantic. So that was great to see, and it looks like they're going to use the tight end a lot more than they have in the past. No matter what Ryan Day says when I ask him that question, Ryan Day lied to me, man. I asked him, before the game, what's he supposed to do, tip his hand? So I'm completely being sarcastic here. But I did ask him, do you think you guys are going to use the tight end more in the passing game this year? He's like, nah, it'll probably be similar to the last few years, thinking. But again, what's he supposed to do as a football coach? Tell me what he's going to do, tip off his opponent. But yeah, that was good to see Jeremy Ruckert out there. And I agree with you about Garrett Wilson. He won't be fine. He'll be more than fine. He'll be a big part of this year's team, and he will be I still think he's going to be a future star. I just thought it was interesting. He got shut out in the opener. All right. Here we go. The Fickle Bowl. Cincinnati Bearcats coming to the Horseshoe, high noon. Buckeyes favored by 17 back. So I was a little surprised. I thought it would be like around maybe 15.5 at the most or something like that. Not that the point spread really matters, but just your thoughts on this game, your thoughts on the spread, just anything you want to say about Buckeyes versus Bearcats this Saturday.
So before the season, I did a little list on the front row where I listed the games that concerned me the most, the games that I considered to be the highest potential for upset for OSU. And there are 2 of them in September. One was Nebraska, obviously, which is kind of the game that's become such a, quote, trap game that maybe it's not a trap game anymore. But the other game that I had listed from September was Cincinnati. And the reason for that is obviously the Bearcats are a good team, but this is their Super Bowl. This isn't just Luke Fickell coming back to the Horseshoe, and for the first time in his life wanting Ohio State to lose a football game. But all these kids that went to Cincinnati from Ohio didn't get an offer from OSU. They didn't get a sniff from OSU. For them, it's a little bit of the FU Bowl because they want to prove that, look, we were good enough to play. There's going to be a lot of kids on that field with a lot to prove. So what OSU has to do in this game is to overcome that emotion from Cincinnati. Now, the truth is, we all know that OSU is the more talented team. I don't think that's debatable. And there's certainly some flaws in UC's team that OSU is going to have to make sure they take advantage of. But OSU has to match their intensity. And coming off the FAU game where they came out like the 1997 Denver Broncos and then ended up not playing, and then they ended up playing like the 1975 Denver Broncos in the second quarter, right? You have to play 4 quarters against UC or there's going to be these lulls in the game that burn you. And that's something OSU has to get better from week 1 to week 2 on this year. And I think that's going to be a critical thing for this game. Now, looking at UC, if you look at their offense, they have a very good tailback in Greg Warren. But I watched that UCLA game, right? And by the way, UCLA was 2 plays away from actually winning that game, where their quarterback just flat out dropped the ball twice in the red zone. Not like they had it knocked away. He just dropped it. And if that happens, that's a touchdown and a field goal at a minimum that they left on the board. And Cincinnati won by 10. So, let's not get too hyped here that Cincinnati, could have reasonably lost to a bad UCLA team. And UCLA couldn't pass the ball to save their lives. Obviously, Justin Fields is going to complete some passes against this UC defense. But going back to Warren, their running backs right now have been really hard hit with injuries. There was a guy who was supposed to share carries at Warren who got hurt in camp. Their new backup was also injured and out. He didn't play much of the UCLA game. I don't think he's expected to play against OSU either. And then Warren late in the game went down clutching his knee, and I thought he hurt himself pretty severely before he came back in. So he may be banged up. So if OSU can slow down the Bearcats' running game, then Cincinnati's not going to be able to compete in this game. And let's face it, the last time Cincinnati played Ohio State, I think there was a lot of concern that it was going to be a closer game than we wanted. That was the game where Anthony Schlegel famously leveled a drunk fan who ran on the field with a clothesline. But OSU won that game by like 4 touchdowns. So I think we all recognize the potential for this not being a good game for Ohio State. But if Ohio State plays anywhere near that potential that we saw in the first quarter against FAU on a more consistent basis in this game, then there is literally nothing to be worried about. And some of us who are the not old campaigners, but maybe medium distance campaigners, remember 2002, Gino Gadoli and the whole Paul Brown Stadium near catastrophe before Craig Krenzel spun his way into the end zone to avoid an upset on move-in day, in a year that Ohio State went to on to win the national championship. So we take UC fairly seriously. But there's a reason Ohio State hasn't lost to another Ohio team in more than a century, and I don't see that changing this weekend.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I had forgotten that was the Anthony Schlegel game back in 2014. I mean, obviously, and who knew at the time, especially watching that defense at the time, giving up all those long touchdowns at UC in 2014, who knew we were looking at a national championship team there in 2014. But yeah, Ohio State won 50-28 the last time they met in 2014, and I forgot that was the Anthony Schlegel game. That's hilarious.
I only remember that because I was at the game. That was amazing. The whole crowd was more excited about Schlegel killing the kids than they. And by the way, that game too, Dave, was the game where OSU broke the school record for total yards, then lost it when a ball got snapped over Cardale Jones's head late in garbage time. They lost like 20 yards on the play. And so it was kind of a statistical anomaly because we're like, wow, we set a record, and there it went. So it was kind of a funny, goofy game at that time too.
And then they set the record, I believe, they set the record, I know for sure, in the opener against Bowling Green in 2016. We're all like, all right, they fixed everything. Ed Warner and Tim Beck, they're going to work just fine. No, Bowling Green, that was like the worst Bowling Green team that they've ever had. Usually Bowling Green's a pretty good team, but they had just switched coaches. Babers went from Bowling Green to Syracuse, and they brought in a new coach, and Bowling Green was awful. Ohio State put up like 771 yards of total offense in that 2016 opener and shattered a bunch of records. We're all like, oh yeah, Barrett can throw. And so just another, little word of caution there. Don't put too much stock in one game. As we saw that, it didn't get much worse than having Ed Warner and Tim Beck calling an offense, especially Ed Warner, as we're learning from the Zach Smith podcast. All right, before I let you go, some breaking news this morning. It's kind of pseudo-breaking news because this has been leaking out since Sunday when Charles Robinson was the first to report this from Yahoo. I want to give him credit. He was the first one to report Sunday morning that the Cowboys and Zeke Elliott were very, very close to a deal, and it was imminent. It wasn't like they were close and it might break down. Like, this will happen. Well, the details are just fantastic for Zeke. He's passed Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley, when he signed his contract, it was $45 million. Plus all the base salary, getting it around $100 million. Zeke, $50 million guaranteed. I mean, plus all the base salary, so probably, again, right around $100 million for the 6-year contract. But the $50 million guaranteed, making him, that's the highest figure for any running back in NFL history. I didn't know if this was going to work to this extent. I figured he was going to sign backs, but I thought maybe it'd be a little bit less than what Gurley got. Good on Zeke.
Well, he deserves it. Let's be honest here. He's still really young. He's got a number of productive years ahead of him. He led the league, twice? And the other year he didn't lead the league was the year he was suspended and may have led the league if he played all the games. So you can make a very easy argument that Zeke Elliott is the best, at minimum you can make the argument he's the most productive tailback in the league. So good on him. NFL tailbacks a lot of times end up playing for pennies for a very long time, and they sign a big contract and they get maybe 1 or 2 years out of it, and then they get cut because they become too expensive because they're getting towards the end of their professional shelf life. So for Zeke, this is good for him because he's going to make a crap load of money because I don't see Zeke, regressing for another couple of years if you look at just normal statistical regression when it comes to tailbacks as they age in the National Football League. Zeke's 24, 25, something like that? So he's got another 4 to 6 productive years in him. He's going to make the majority of the money in that contract, and that's absolutely
24.
Awesome for him.
Yeah, 24. Can you believe that? It feels like, because he wasn't like young for. I mean, he was kind of young for his grade. Like a lot of these guys, get held back, quote unquote held back, so, for sports. Zeke was actually kind of young for his grade. Not like Paris Campbell young, but yeah, he's only 24, which is surprising. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, that's the point, right? He's got another 5, 6, 7 years of being a top end tailback. I mean, like realistically speaking, I bet you, you talk about these contracts, they sign a 6-year deal, you laugh and you go, what's the first 3 years, right? The truth is for Zeke, he's going to get probably 5 years of this deal for sure. And with those guarantees put in, I mean, if it's, $100 million, Zeke probably is walking away at the end of the day with $80 to $90 million when we're talking about, realistic money that's going to end up in his pocket. And that's absolutely awesome. And by the way, if you're Ohio State, you should be trumpeting this left and right in running back recruiting, which we've been talking about for months now. Hey, Bijan Robinson, just wanted to point out that the highest paid tailback in the National Football League is an OSU alum. How's that? That sort of thing. Hey, Jalen Knighton, I know you were super excited to go to a school that just lost to Boise State, but, see what Zeke did? These are sort of things that Tony Alford can use.
I will say this just to close the show. We'll circle all the way back to running backs. I will say I liked what I saw at Master Teague, and talk about a small sample size. I liked what I saw at Marcus Crowley, but you're talking about four carries at the very end of the game. But I think they have something there. Master Teague it's not where Ohio State wants it to be. They want to have just a guy that's like Ezekiel Elliott or a Carlos Hyde, or the bar has been set so high. But it's also not catastrophic by any means when you look at the future. I mean, this year, hopefully Dobbins gets better and better. I agree with you. I think that Ryan Day was not very pleased with the way J.K. Dobbins played. I don't know how he could have been. J.K. Dobbins clearly was missing holes out there where they were well blocked. But Master Teague, Marcus Crowley, I think they have something there backs. I hope they do.
I think they do too. And I think as the year goes on, you're not going to have a carry share where J.K. Dobbins has 24 carries or whatever he had, 22 carries, something like that. And Demario McCall has 3, and Master Teague has 3. It's not going to be like that. I think you're going to see J.K. more with that 10 to 15. And let's face it, too, against a better opponent, Dobbins is going to catch a lot more passes out of the backfield. So you're going to have that mixed up a bit more. I think Dobbins is probably always going to have more than half the touches for the tailbacks if he's healthy, but you're going to see that change as it gets on further on. And you know how high I am on Crowley. We've been talking about him for all summer. I love that low, powerful runner. I don't know if OSU had that guy initially until coming into the spring game with Crowley. And Crowley can move the pile. I don't necessarily know that any of these other guys can yet.
Well, great stuff from the People's Champ Matt Baxendell on this edition of the Bucknuts Morning 20 and change. We went really an extended edition here, but so much to say. So much to talk about, so much to say.
The season's back. We can talk about stuff, man. That's what we can do now.
Not that we would ever need to manufacture conversations in the off season or anything, but it is much easier now to come up with topics. It's like we leave some topics on the just on the cutting room floor because there's so much to talk about. It's just great that football's here. And thanks again to the People's Champ Matt Baxendell, and thanks to all the listeners out there for tuning into the show. I appreciate it. Hope everyone has a great day. Let's hear that Buckeye swag, best damn band in the land.